Okay. So, how'd this go for you?
First time I read it, it was pretty good.
Okay.
Yep. I actually have a pretty good memory of what happened since the last time I read it, and then upon trying to get myself reacquainted with it.
Okay.
As far as it being called a masterpiece, that just kind of begs the question of what a masterpiece constitutes, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and that's always subjective.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, what I want to do today, I want to talk a little bit about, as usual, the manuscript and the style. I want to talk a little bit about how it maps onto the real world and why the region in which it takes place is important. And then also discuss some of the things that make this unusual as we go through the first two passages or passi of the poem. Okay, so I know you said you've done this in class before, right?
Yes.
So any information that I'm giving you that you already know, go ahead and stop me and fill me in with what you do know. Okay.
All right.
So first thing to note about the manuscript of this is that there is only one. Right? It's known from only one.
And was it our dear friend Captain again?
It was indeed. In fact, the manuscript in which this poem appears is referred to as Cotton Nero A10. This is because the way Cotton organized his library was by placing busts of Roman emperors on top of the various bookshelves.
So Nero 10.
Yep. This was yep. Nero, shelf A, number 10. Yep.
They came up with a Dewey Decimal System at some point.
Yep, just not in the 18th century. So there are 3 other poems in this manuscript. 2 poems on biblical subjects, which are referred to as cleanness and patience. And the titles for all 4 of the poems in the book were given to them by scholars much later on. In the manuscript itself, there are no titles. There is also one of the best medieval allegorical dream vision poems, The Pearl, which you will also find in this volume, but which we aren't reading because it doesn't have as much bearing, I think, on The Lord of the Rings as some of these other texts. And a long verse romance Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. These are all believed to be the work of the same poet. We do not know who that poet is. His name is lost to history, although there are some who argue that a courtier based in Cheshire in Western England by the name of John Massey fits the bill. I'm not a medievalist, so I don't really know how good or convincing their arguments are. But yeah, there's no definitive proof as to who wrote these poems. But they are all believed to be by the same person. What we do know is that they're composed around the year 1400. So end of the 14th, beginning of the 15th century. They are written in the West Midlands dialect of Middle English. So to give you some sense of what this means and why it matters.
West Midlands, so that's about Welsh territory?
Yeah, actually, part of the West Midlands are on the Welsh border. I'm about to show you exactly where we're talking about. So yeah, this is the broader location of the West Midlands within Britain, and this is a close-up map of the region. So we see, it encompasses the counties, the modern counties of Shropshire, Staffordshire, Warwickshire, Worcestershire, Herefordshire, and West Midlands. Go ahead.
So not particularly in Wales, but the area near it.
Yeah, borders Wales. And indeed, much of the geography of this poem suggests a West Midlands, North Wales location. A lot of the places that Gowing travels to are identifiable locations. We've already talked about the Wirral Peninsula. That's near Liverpool. It's one of the places where they think the Battle of Burnborough might have been fought. It's right about here-ish somewhere.
And in the other class, we were talking about Lakeshire and the Wye River Valley. And that's
That would be the Lake District is up here, and Lancashire is just south of it. So that would all be north of here.
Okay. All right.
Camelot, or at least two of the proposed locations for it, would be, one proposed location would be Curlew down around here, and another would be Winchester, kind of down here. But yeah, any way you slice it, Gawain on his way to the wasteland would be passing through this area. The largest city in this region, and this is important mostly in terms of Tolkien's biography, is Birmingham in the West Midlands, which is one where Black Sabbath is from, but also where Tolkien and his younger brother grew up. So he was particularly drawn to this poem and to the work of the Gawain poet or Pearl poet, in part because the work was so closely connected to his home region and the region where the ancestral region of his family.
Okay, so Birmingham, that was the city area that he moved to a little bit later after he was born, because
he's born in South Africa. Yeah,
that's great. Okay.
Yeah,
and then he moves to Birmingham when he's in his formative years, and then he goes into World War I.
Yeah, because his parents' families were from the Birmingham area. This is also so while he's born in South Africa, his family's roots were in this region. And what makes the West Midlands particularly important for thinking about medieval literature and medieval language is that the West Midlands dialect ends up being a kind of linguistic dead end. The English that we speak today is descended much more directly from Geoffrey Chaucer's London dialects. The Gowing poet is pretty much believed to be pretty much an exact contemporary with Chaucer.
Alright, and where on the map exactly is London? Okay, so Eastern. So
Yeah.
the more English type that we speak today is coming from the Eastern English area, which is closer relative to the West Midlands when Tolkien was born,
Yeah.
as opposed to what it is in the 15th century.
Yeah, at the beginning of the 15th century, this would be kind of rural hinterland. So this would be very far from the centers of power. Now, the Midlands are also important in that they comprised part of what was called the Danelaw in about the 8th, about the 9th through 11th centuries. And the Danelaw was the region that the Norse controlled within England. So, if we look on the map, like what's now the West Midlands maps almost perfectly onto the old Saxon kingdom of Mercia, but immediately to the east of Mercia was the Danelaw, which was controlled by Vikings. And we find in the West Midlands dialects, particularly the West Midlands dialect used by the Gowing poet, much more frequent use of Norse loanwords than we find in other English dialects. So a much closer connection to Germanic literatures in that way. And there's another important connection to Germanic literatures, and that has to do less with the region in which this was produced and more with the style in which it's produced.
Not for the life of me, I can't remember what that stanza thing is called. The wheel.
Bobbin wheel,
Bobbin
yes.
wheel.
You're thinking of the Bobbin wheel, yeah. Now, the Bobbin wheel is pretty much unique to this poem. That doesn't really occur elsewhere in English language poetry. So we'll talk about the Bobbin wheel and how that works in a second. I think it sounds like you're already a little bit familiar with it. This poem is regarded as part of what was called the Alliterative Revival. Which also ended up being a kind of linguistic and cultural dead end.
So old things becoming new again, sort of coming from Old English poetry back to this Middle English poetry of alliteration instead of rhyming.
Yeah, although as we saw, this poem actually uses both. But yeah, what they were trying to do was bring Anglo-Saxon poetic structures back into English poetry. So in the late 14th, early 15th centuries, the King of England was Richard II. His exact
Second.
Pardon?
Not the third, but the second.
Not the third, the second, yeah. We often forget about the second. Although he was also deposed.
Oh, he was?
What's that?
He was always indisposed? Or indisposed? Or
No, he was deposed. Kicked out.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if you've ever read the Shakespeare play Henry IV, Henry IV is the king who kicks Richard II out of England.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that's
Okay.
off topic.
But yeah, anywho, yeah. So Richard was known as a Francophile. And the culture of his court was predominantly French. And indeed, much of the poetry that is written by court poets of this period particularly in southeastern England, even if it's in English, it's still heavily influenced by French poetry, in particular in its use of rhyme, right? It's easy to rhyme in French because they have regular, like regular verb endings, things like that. It's hard to rhyme in English. So this alliterative revival is taking place far away from London for the most part. And yeah, mostly in the north and west of England. And apart from the works of the Gowing poet, the best known poem in this mode is written by a disgruntled clergyman named William Langland. And it's a dream vision poem called The Vision of Piers Plowman, not Plowsman.
We also read that one in Britlit.
Oh, okay. All right. We won't be reading it in here.
That's a little too much Christianity in that one.
It is. It's pretty. Yeah. I mean, and like most of the Gowing poet's work is pretty Jesus-y, which is one of the things that makes this poem a strange departure from his apparent usual patterns. But yeah. So the other thing that makes this poem particularly noteworthy is that weird bobbin wheel structure that we talked about. Right? The bob is a short line, and then the wheel consists of 4 long lines. And the pattern, the rhyming pattern starting with the bob, is A, B, A, B, A. So what this poem does is weave together rhyme with alliteration. Right. So let's get to the content of the poem itself. So what do we notice this starts with?
It's New Year's Eve.
Oh, even before that. What's at the very beginning of the poem?
Before all of it? Okay. Oh, it starts with going back to Rome, the Roman Empire.
Yeah, we have another one of these fake histories, right? Connecting Troy and the Trojan War to Britain, right? So essentially what we have here is what we have here in miniature form is the basic plot of Lacemon's Roman de Brute, right? Where Brutus, the Trojan hero, descendant of Aeneas, establishes his kingdom full fair in Britain, right? Where strange things, strife and sadness, and wiles in the land did fare, and each other grief and gladness all fast have followed thither. And when fair Britain was founded by this famous lord, bold men were bred there who in battle rejoiced, and many a time that betid the troubles aroused. In this domain more marvels have by men been seen than in any other that I know since that olden time. But of all that here abode in Britain as kings, ever was Arthur most honored, as I heard men tell. Wherefore a marvel among men I mean to recall, a sight strange to see some men have held it, one of the wildest adventures of the wonders of Arthur. If you will listen to this lay but a little while now, I will tell it as once in town I have heard it told, as is fixed and fettered in story brave and bold, thus linked and lettered as was loved in this land of old. So part of what's going on here in this description of Brutus's settlement of Britain is this notion that Britain, right, one, has a classical pedigree that is not dependent on any French influence, and two, that Britain combines the civilized with the wild and or the marvelous. Right, that it contains both of these things within its borders. And then we get to the Christmas feast, right? So what might be important here about Christmas time particularly? What characteristics of the Christmas season might be important in a poem like this? If we think not so much about what the holiday symbolizes, but when it occurs.
Well, it's certainly cold outside.
Okay, yes. Very cold. Yeah,
Nobody's going to want to be outside. People want to be inside.
Yep, happens in winter. Yep, when people want to be indoors.
The new year is coming.
Yeah, there we go. And in fact, Christmas, at the time this poem was written, would encompass the new year. We're talking about a celebration that takes place over a number of days, rather than, a single day or a day and a night. So yeah, so it takes place. So the new year. So it's a liminal point in the calendar, right? Between one year and the next. And as such, in old romances, it is often one of those times when some marvel occurs, right? It's one of those times in the year when, the worlds overlap. So what do you make here of the way Arthur and his men are described here? If we look at just even in this first verse paragraph that talks about them, right? This king lay at Camelot at Christmastide, with many a lovely lord, lieges most noble, indeed of the table round, all those tried brethren, amid merriment unmatched and mirth without care. There tourneyed many a time the trusty knights, and jousted full joyously these gentle lords. Then to the court they came at carols to play, for there the feast was unfailing full 15 days, with all meats and all mirth that men could devise. Such gladness and gaiety was glorious to hear, din of voices by day and dancing by night. All happiness in the highest halls and in bowers of the lords and the ladies, such as they loved most dearly.
There's definitely respect.
Okay.
One of the big takeaways, I think, is respect for the ring bearer, the spreader of wealth.
Okay.
Arthur. And his men are described as these joyous, happy guys. They're gentle lords. They're good to their people, but also they're the chivalrous, noble knights.
Sure.
They'll take up arms when they need to for their people.
And I think that the thing about taking up arms here, I think, is important. What kind of fighting is happening here? There tourneyed many a time the trusty knights, and jousted full joyously these gentle lords. Then to the court they came at carols to play.
And then came to what?
And then to the court they came at carols to play.
Oh, okay. They enjoy fighting.
Yeah, it's play, right? This is play fighting. It's a game. Right? No different from coming in and playing, like carols refers in this case, like not so much to like religious songs or Christmas songs, but songs that are accompanied by a ring dance. They're singing, they're dancing, right? This is all part of the same holiday complex here, right? You know, jousting and tourneying are just another amusement here. Now, if we look at the first description of Arthur himself on page 26, but Arthur would not eat until all were served. His youth made him so merry with the moods of a boy. He liked light-hearted life, so loved he the less either long to be lying or long to be seated. So worked on him his young blood and wayward brain. And another rule, moreover, was his reason besides that in pride he had appointed, it pleased him not to eat upon festivals so fair, ere he were first apprised of some strange story or stirring adventure, or some moving marvel that he might believe in of noble men, knighthood, or new adventures, or a challenger should come, a champion seeking to join with him in jousting, in jeopardy to set his life against life, each allowing the other the favor of fortune, were she fairer to him. This was the king's custom, wherever his court was holden, at each famous feast among his fair company in hall. So his face doth proud appear, and he stands up stout and tall, all young in the new year, much mirth he makes withal. So what kind of picture of this king do we get in terms of his, say, like, you know, manliness or maturity?
Oh, well, he's young, he's generous.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily heavy-hearted, he's pretty light-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
He's the kind of guy you probably want to have a beer with.
Sure. But he's also described as boyish, right?
A little headstrong.
Yeah, and maybe for a king, a little immature, right? It's like, I'm not going to eat my dinner until some strange marvel comes in here and surprises me, right? Which, okay, seems bizarre, right? But also, you know, yeah, it's the attitude here is meant to convey immaturity, right? Now we then juxtapose this against the appearance of the Green Knight. Let's look to page 30 here. I mean, beyond the description of his clothes, you know, we've already been told that he's half a troll in height. Right? Very gay was this great man guised all in green, and the hair of his head with his horses accorded. Fair flapping locks enfolded his shoulders, a big beard like a bush over his breast hanging, that with the handsome hair from his head falling, was sharp shorn to an edge just short of his elbows, so that half his arms under it were hid, as it were, in a king's capados that encloses his neck. The mane of that mighty horse was of much the same sort, well curled and all combed, with many curious knots, woven in with gold wire about the wondrous green, ever a strand of the hair and a string of gold. The tail and the top lock were twined all to match, and both bound with a band of brilliant green, with dear jewels bedight to the dock's ending, and twisted then on top was a tight-knitted knot, on which many burnished bells of bright gold jingled. Such a mount on middle earth or man to ride him was never beheld in that hall with eyes ere that time. For there his glance was as lightning bright, so did all that saw him swear, no man would have the might they thought his blows to bear. So we've got this giant with an enormous green beard, right? And long flowing hair. So the beard suggests maturity and virility, right? But also, because it's green, vegetation.
I'm trying to remember what the symbolism of him being so green was.
Well, you know, let's pause for a moment here and look at some stuff. There's a common motif in medieval religious architecture called the Green Man. And this is one of those things that seems to be a holdover from pre-Christian religions that has made its way into church ornamentation, right? So most of these look more or less the same. There are these little spots in the cathedral where you've got a carven image of a man's face with a beard made out of leaves, right? And you find these all over Europe. Right, this is another example. So, the Green Knight seems to be connected in some way to this Green Man ornamental motif. And the Green Man itself is probably connected to older fertility religions. In fact, you see examples of this trope going back to like Lebanon in the 2nd century. So it's not just a European phenomenon.
But still pagan.
But still pagan, yeah. It's kind of like a similar figure to, I don't know, do you know what a Sheila na gig is?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you know what a Sheila na gig is? Have you ever heard of that?
I can't even pronounce it, so no.
Yeah, it's a motif you find often above the doorway in Irish and Scottish medieval churches. It's a woman, like an old and ugly woman, kind of pulling open her nether parts. And it's probably also connected to older fertility religions in some way, but no one's quite sure exactly what these motifs mean. But most people are agreed that they're holdovers from these older fertility faiths. So we can sort of stick that under the Green Knight here as well. And yet he had not a helm, nor a hauberk either, nor a pisane, not a plate that was proper to arms, not a shield, not a shaft for shock or for blow. But in his one hand he held a holly bundle, that is greatest in greenery when groves are leafless, and an axe in the other, ugly and monstrous, a ruthless weapon aright for one in rhyme to describe. This holly bundle is also important, especially as the Green Knight himself resembles one. We're told at another point that while most of him is green or gold, his eyes are red. So like little red berries in a green pile of leaves.
So the holly just represents himself, or kind of has the same look as him. Red eyes, red berries. Okay.
Yeah, he's kind of clearly connected visually to the holly bundle. And I think it also helps if we think about what holly symbolizes. Like, why do we put holly out in the winter? Never really thought about it, huh?
I know there's a reason. I've heard the reason. I can't remember the reason.
Well, it's partly like pretty much all of the plants that we associate with the Christmas season are evergreens. Right, in fact, the traditional medieval and Renaissance English Christmas plants, in addition to holly and ivy, would have been bays and rosemary. People would decorate their homes with these plants that were reminders of the renewal of life in the season of deprivation and death. And I think that this is relevant to what we know about the Green Knight's challenge, right? What does the Green Knight know when he issues his challenge that Sir Gawain doesn't know?
And then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, I'm fine. All right, I'm
Yeah.
out here. I'll see you in a year's time.
Yeah, nobody expects this guy to pick his head up, put it under his arm, and ride away, right? So, the beheading game is another common motif in medieval literature. And it usually follows the same model, right? It's usually it's a test of courage and honesty. So, some usually large monstrous figure will stride into a feast where there are, numerous heroes seated. We'll challenge those heroes to a game that looks very much like the Green Knights, right? You get to strike my head off, and then if I survive, I get to do the same thing to you at the appointed time and place, right? It's important that it's always like at some appointed time and place, right? Because part of the thing is that the hero has to show up, right? That's part of the test. So the earliest example of this, at least that I'm aware of, is Brickru's Feast. Which is an 8th century old Irish tale, which features the hero Cuchulainn and a mysterious figure called Curoi, whose name translates to something like Hound of the Battlefield. So Curoi comes into the feast, challenges the 3 major heroes there to his game. All 3 accept. The first 2 strike off his head, and then when he picks it up and walks away, they don't come back to fulfill the challenge the next night. Cuchulainn is the only one who does. And so as a reward, Curoi just gives him a little symbolic tap and says, you were the only one who was brave enough to meet the challenge. There are also examples of this in French romances, right? The most obvious and direct sources for Sir Gawain of the 11th and 12th centuries. So this motif is probably of Celtic origin and makes its way into the Arthurian tradition via France. Now, one thing I want to note here are, first off, the way the Green Knight addresses the court, and also the way Gawain asks for the challenge. We look on page 33. Arthur has said to the knight, Sir, noble knight, if battle thou seek thus bear, thou fail not here to fight. Nay, I wish for no warfare, on my word I tell thee. Hereabout on these benches are but beardless children. Were I hasp in armor on a high charger, there is no man here to match me, their might is so feeble. And so I crave in this court only a Christmas pastime, since it is Yule and New Year, and you are young here and merry. If any so hardy in this house here holds that he is, if so bold be his blood or his brain be so wild, that he stoutly dare strike one stroke for another, then I will give him as my gift this gisarm costly, this axe. 'Tis heavy enough, to handle as he pleases. And I will abide the first brunt, here bare as I sit. If any fellow be so fierce as my faith to test, hither let him haste to me and lay hold of this weapon. I hand it over forever, he can have it as his own. And I will stand a stroke from him, stock still on this floor, provided thou lay down this law, that I may deliver him another. Claim I, and yet a respite I'll allow, till a year and a day go by. Come quick, and let's see now if any here dare reply. So, what is he suggesting about Arthur's knights and about his court?
Calling them cowards, being like, come on, try me. I'm here. It's Christmas. You really gonna turn this down in front of your king?
Mm-hmm. Is that his primary mode of mockery here, though? You are young here and merry. Here about on these benches are but beardless children. What does he keep emphasizing about them?
That they're green. Well, not green. Not green. Not green in the same sense as him.
No,
green
not
in the other
yes.
sense.
Yes, green as in inexperienced, yeah. He keeps highlighting their youth and their inexperience, yeah. Compared to me, you are young. And I think this makes some sense if we think about this in historical political terms. And we look at page 26 and the way Arthur's court is decorated, right? Dearly was it arrayed, finest sendal at her sides, a ceiling above her of true tissue of Toulouse, and tapestries of Tharsia that were embroidered and bound with the brightest gems, one might prove and appraise to purchase for coin any day. So most of the decorations are foreign imports, specifically from France. Now this is a poem written by a poet in the West Midlands in an Anglo-Saxon derived style.
So that's kind of that nationalist feel. Isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
As, what was it? What did we just read? That was the same thing. Sir Orfeo.
Sir Orfeo, yeah, exactly. It's that same kind of Anglo-Saxon / Celtic / Norse pushing back against this Frenchifying influence. Although here, historically, it's even probably further along. And I think there are specific shots being taken at the very Frenchified court of Richard II. Yeah, y'all are new here. You don't know we're stressing his greater age and maturity, right? And indeed, Gawain is going to have to go out into the north, out into the wastes, to find the Green Knight, away from the civilized center here, and away from the world of these French romances. In fact, if we look in part 2, when Gowing goes off on his journey, or on page 50, many a cliff he climbed o'er in countries unknown, far fled from his friends without fellowship he rode. At every wading or water on the way that he passed, he found a foe before him, save it few for a wonder. And so foul were they and fell that fight he must needs. So many a marvel in the mountains he met in those lands, that 'twould be tedious the 10th part to tell you thereof. At whiles with worms he wars, and with wolves also, at whiles with wood trolls that wandered in the crags, and with bulls, and with bears, and with boars too at times, and with ogres that hounded him from the heights of the fells. So, all of his adventures on the way to the wasteland are glossed over here quickly, right? Now, in a conventional romance, these digressions would be an important part of the story.
Yeah, if it was written like Beowulf, they would have been in a lot more detail.
Sure. Or, I mean, if it was written even kind of like the immediate predecessors of a work like this, like, you know, the romances of someone like Chrétien de Troyes, who wrote most of the major Arthurian romances of the 12th century. It's all these kind of series of not always clearly connected adventures, right? But the adventures are the important part, right? That's the meat of the story, more so than the actual goal. So what we're getting here is a sense that this really is something different in the world of medieval romance. This is something more goal-directed, right? It doesn't matter that Gawain has all of these battles with all of these monsters.
It's about the end game.
Yeah. What matters is getting him to the Green Chapel for this final confrontation, right? For this test. Now, we do also see that for at least some portion of this journey, he is in the real world. And another scholar has gone and done the work of trying to map out much of Gawain's journey here. So, these are Gawain's two possible starting points, right? This is Winchester, and this is Caerleon, right? Two of the most common presumed locations for Camelot, even though, you know, presumed location assumes that Camelot was a real place, which it wasn't. And several of the places up here are specifically mentioned as part of Gawain's route. Right? So, for example, we know that he travels through the Wirral up here near Liverpool. To anon he drew near unto North Wales. All the Isles of Anglesey he held on his left, and over the fords he fared by flats near the sea. Now that could be, the flats could be one of two places, the River Conwy, or the River Clyde. Cloyd, I don't know. I don't know how you. I don't get it. I don't really. I can't pronounce Welsh words, so. So yeah, there are potentially two rivers that he crosses, and then over by the Holy Head to high land again. By Holy Head is actually all the way out here, so it's unlikely that that's what's meant. Well, where he probably means is a place that's now called Holywell. Into the wilderness of Wirral. There wandered but few who with good will regarded either god or mortal. And ever he asked as he went on all of whom he met, if they had heard any news of a knight that was green in any grounds thereabouts, or of the Green Chapel. And all denied it, saying nay, and that never in their lives a single man had they seen of such a color could be. So at this time, he is still in Arthur's realm of Logres. Logres is a traditional name for the kingdom that Arthur ruled, which encompasses most but not all of what is now England. plus parts of what is now Wales. And while he's still within Logres, no one knows anything about the Green Knight, right? He makes no progress, no headway in his quest. And it's only when he goes by Pathway Strange that he finds both adventures against a variety of weird and monstrous foes, and finally, this castle where people have actually fucking heard of the Green Knight, right? And the Green Chapel. It's like, oh yeah, we know where that is. Well, sure, yeah, sure. You know, just, you know, it's nearby. Just stay here a couple days, and we'll send somebody to take you over. So there are a couple of readings here of what's going on, right? So there's an article that I put on your bibliography there by Miriam Youngerman Miller, where she suggests that Logres is the primary world, that is kind of the real world for the characters in the poem. And that the Pathway Strange, the wasteland that he enters, are the secondary world of fantasy.
Which opens up in that liminal space of time when it's almost the new year.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, yeah, he's in that same liminal time. Yeah. So, one of the pieces of evidence that she uses for this, look on page 54, when Gowing finds the castle, right? So many a painted pinnacle was peppered about among the crenels of the castle, clustered so thickly that all pared out of paper it appeared to have been. Right? There's something about the castle that almost doesn't look real.
You said page 54?
Yeah, it's near the middle of the page. I was about to say it's underlined in red, but then it was, oh, I did that. It wouldn't be in your book. So yeah, part of Miller's argument is that this suggests that the castle is a kind of fantasy castle. Now, most other scholars argue that the medieval mind wouldn't have seen things in a real world, fantasy world kind of way, but they might have seen things in a civilized world, wilderness kind of way. Or in a normal world, other world kind of way, right? That the wasteland in which Gowing finds the castle is not so much a created secondary world as it is kind of a place where the fairy world and the normal world overlap. Plus, there is that well-defined distinction between city and wilderness, right? Camelot being the city, wherever the hell he is now being the wilderness, right? And the normal civilized rules don't apply in the wilderness. So, I also do want to take a quick look at the way the symbol on Gowing's shield is described, because I think this is really important in particular to the way his quest ends up and what this symbol is supposed to indicate, right? So he's got a pentacle painted on his shield, right? A 5-pointed star with no break inside a circle. Right, page 47. Then they brought him his blazon that was of brilliant gules that is red, with the pentacle depicted in pure hue of gold. By the baldric he caught it, and about his neck he cast it. Right well and worthily it went with that knight. And why the pentacle is proper to that prince so noble, I intend now to tell you, though it may tarry my story. It is a sign that Solomon once set on a time to betoken troth, as it is entitled to do. For it is a figure that in it 5 points holdeth, and each line overlaps and is linked with another, and every way it is endless. And the English, I hear, everywhere name it the endless knot. So it suits well this knight and his unsullied arms, for ever faithful in 5 points, and 5 times under each. Gawain as good was acknowledged and as gold refined, devoid of every vice, and with virtues adorned. So there the pentacle painted new, he on shield and coat did wear, as one of word most true, and knight of bearing fair. First faultless was he found in his 5 senses, and next in his 5 fingers he failed at no time. And firmly on the 5 wounds all his faith was set that Christ received on the cross, as the creed tells us. And wherever the brave man into battle was come, on this beyond all things was his earnest thought, that ever from the 5 joys all his valor he gained, that to heaven's courteous queen once came from her child. For which cause the knight had in comely wise on the inner side of his shield her image depainted, that which he had, that when he cast his eyes thither his courage never failed. The 5th 5 that was used, as I find by this knight, was free given in friendliness before all, and chastity and chivalry ever changeless and straight, and piety surpassing all points. These perfect 5 were hasped upon him harder than on any man else. So these 5 things, right, so his 5 senses, his 5 fingers, right, which are indicators of his prowess. The 5 wounds of Christ. The 5 joys of Mary. Right, these are both indicators of his piety. And finally, the 5 chivalric virtues. Right, these are emblematic of his moral perfection. So, physical prowess, piety, and moral perfection. All of this is supposed to be knitted together in this figure of the knight. And the pentacle as a symbol of perfection, right? Does it seem like we're already setting this poor bastard up for a fall?
So many rules and so many virtues.
Yeah. I mean, it's an impossible standard to live up to, right? For anyone. And it's also an indicator that the modesty that Gawain shows at Arthur's court when asking for the challenge and saying, what a lowly and pointless knight he is. It's false modesty, right? Because he's got here emblazoned on his shield the symbol of perfection. Right. So, yeah, he's going off into the world as the perfect knight. And when he arrives at this other court, on page 58, this Lord's men are excited that Gowing's here, right? Which once again indicates that Gawain is famous, right? People know who he is. Right, the inquiry and question were carefully put, touching personal points to that prince himself, till he courteously declared that to the court he belonged, that high King Arthur in honor held in his sway, who was the right royal king of the Round Table, and 'twas Gawain himself that as their guest now sat, and had come for that Christmas, as the case had turned out. When the Lord learned whom luck had brought him, loud laughed he thereat, so delighted he was, and they made very merry all the men in that castle. And to appear in the presence were pressing and eager of one who all profits and prowess and perfect manners comprised in his person, and praise ever gained. Of all men on Middle Earth, he was most admired. Softly each said then in secret to his friend, now fairly shall we mark the fine points of manners, and the perfect expressions of polished converse. How speech is well spent will be expounded unasked, since we have found here this fine father of breeding. God has given us of his goodness, his grace now indeed, who such a guest as Gawain has granted us to have. When blissful men at board for his birth sing blithe at heart, what manners high may mean, this night will now impart. Who hears him will, I ween, of love speech learn some art. So are these guys expecting that Gawain is going to give them entertainment in sports and physical games?
Sports and physical games?
Yeah, is he going to be jousting with them, fighting with them, hunting with them, wrestling with them?
The big jock of the place, and he's supposed to be this perfect idea of a human being. That's what they're expecting.
Yeah. But what do they expect to learn from him?
Godliness.
Yeah. Manners.
Yeah.
Polished converse. Love speech. Yeah. So he's not, at least to them, he's not famous as a warrior, right? He's famous as a courtier. So it's again kind of casting a kind of backward aspersion onto Arthur's court again as an unmanly place where these where these are what the real virtues are. Refined speech, fashion, nice clothes, knowing what to say and who to say it to. And the game that they play at the Lord's house at page 61 offers a bit of kind of dark foreshadowing here too, right? The Lord for their delight leaped up full often, many times merry games being minded to make. His hood he doffed, and on high he hung it on a spear, and offered it as an honor for any to win, who the most fun could devise at that Christmas feast. And I shall try by my troth to contend with the best ere I forfeit this hood with the help of my friends. So the hood up on the spear mirrors the beheading game, with the head as the prize. So, do you have any questions about any of this? Since we're about, since we started a little early, we're about at time.
We didn't necessarily talk about Mary and praying to the saints instead of Jesus himself, but I think we could go without that as far as Tolkien's concerned.
And I think a lot of that is also like what's going on there is it's a very Catholic. It's still a very Catholic world, right? So instead of praying directly to God or to Jesus, one would typically pray to a saint to intercede. But I think it is interesting in particular that Gowing's patron saint is the Virgin Mary. She's painted on the inside of his shield. She is the saint to whom he constantly makes reference and asks for refuge. And I'm going to leave it here, but I think we're going to, one thing we'll pick up next time is how this might be related to the young woman and the old woman. At the Lord's court. Since Gawain actually does end up spending more time with the women than he does with the men. Okay, so
Calculated, of course.
all right, so let me give you the questions for next time. And we'll finish this up on Wednesday. And then I think after that we're going to start reading Tolkien's actual stuff. So.